Musorgsky not only lacked access to Western musical education, but he also rejected it. But how does one compose after rejecting the Western tools of the job? And what led him to such a decision? To understand this, it is important to examine Russia's trends in arts after the mid-19th century. The practice of the new government showed important differences from the methods of the preceding regime. There was a whiff of softness and tolerance characteristic of the new monarch, Alexander II. Petty press constraints were removed. Universities breathed more freely. Society showed a more vigorous spirit. It was said that the sovereign wanted truth, enlightenment, honesty, and a free voicing of views. Thus said the historian Sergei Platonov about Russia after the death of Nicholas I. Indeed, Russia went under significant changes in the 1860s, initiated by its defeat in the Crimean War in 1856. The monarchy started to lose its power, and the serf-based state was weakening. In 1861, the Emancipation of the Serfs was issued, and it caused an influx of labor into the cities, to the factories, where even worse work and life conditions awaited them. In the midst of the social turmoil, Nikolai Chernyshevsky, a figure whose influence would soon become impossible to ignore, called upon an armed uprising of the serfs upon realizing that after Europe, Russia too would have a rapid transition to capitalism. What was until then under the czars and aristocracy's control passed into the hands of self-made millionaires, entrepreneurs, and factory owners. Since Russia's Europeanization by Peter the Great, who built Petersburg, everything Russian in art and culture was viewed as inferior to its European and especially French equivalent, with the nobility preferring French culture. Meanwhile, serious artists in Russia were seeking to express a distinctly Russian identity. The inability to continue the strict censorship provided opportunities for the flourishing of all the arts. The journal Russian Messenger published Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment and Brothers Karamazov, Tolstoy's War and Peace, and Turgenev's Fathers and Sons. In painting, the Petrovichniki, a group of painters who called themselves wanderers, decided to leave the Academy of Arts in Petersburg, which had a European curriculum, and started painting the aspects of Russian life. Their collective search for the art that is useful to society had foundations in writings like Nikolai Chernyshevsky's Aesthetic Relations of Art to Reality, which, along with the novel What Is to Be Done, became so influential that by 1865, painters and composers modeled their works after it. As a matter of fact, the influence reached Vladimir Lenin, who published a pamphlet under the same name in 1902, and through him, the whole history of the 20th century. A significant part of Russia's art flourishing can be traced back to a single estate, the Abramtsevo, located outside Moscow. Its owners in the 19th century were Sergei Aksakov and Sava Mamontov. Mamontov was a railway merchant who surrounded himself with a circle of artists in his estate. He also founded the first Russian private opera, whose repertoire featured works by Russian composers. Apart from Mamontov, the Petrovichniki had support by Pavel Tretyakov, who persistently kept buying their paintings, adding them up to what would become Russia's most important art gallery named after him. Music was directed too under the same quest for expression, with its composers aiming to compose the distinctively Russian music based on Russia's language and tradition. In the 1860s, the Balakirev Circle was formed, called the Mighty Five, Maguchia Kuchka, which was a group of 5 composers, Balakirev, Musorgsky, Kiwi, Borodin, and Rimsky-Korsakov, striving to express their nation in musical terms, with Balakirev assuming the role of mentor to the other 4, since he was the first to become a self-taught composer. Education in music composition was almost absent in Russia, which made traveling abroad to study the only option. There was not an adequate supply of books and teachers, as Russia has just last century begun its westernization, and just this century started to take part in the development of Western music. In 1862, the first conservatory offering teaching of the West's music was founded in Petersburg, and in 1864 in Moscow. It seems that Musorgsky's approach to composition could not be other than an idiomatic, innovative, and intuitive one, like his contemporary Russian composers. He went straight to the Russian spoken language to develop his musical one. In his vocal compositions, the musical setting resembles that of the spoken Russian language, following the language's inherent rhythm and intonation in the spoken word and the folk song. Tempo, measures, intervals are all manipulated to reflect the rhythm of the Russian language. He called this process rationally justified melody. In a letter to Rimsky-Korsakov, he mentions, "Whatever speech I hear, whoever is speaking, my brain is already churning out the musical embodiment of such speech." The decision to follow this approach was initiated by the rejection of the Western composition tools and was influenced by his readings of Darwin, the author of The Origin of Species, and Nikolai Chernyshevsky. The first purpose of art is to reproduce nature and life, and this applies to all works of art without exception. And he, the artist, will in his works, consciously or unconsciously, strive to pronounce a living judgment on the phenomena that interest him and interest his contemporaries, for a thinking man cannot think about insignificant problems that interest nobody but himself, says Chernyshevsky. The effect of his writings is evident in Musorgsky's correspondence. In a letter from 1872 to Vladimir Stasov, he writes, "The artistic depiction of beauty alone, that is, in its material sense, is sheer childishness, art in its infancy. The finest traits in man's nature and in the mass of humanity tirelessly digging through these little-known regions and conquering them, that is the true mission of the artist. Towards new shores, fearlessly through storms and shallows and treacherous rocks, towards new shores." The abolition of serfdom in 1861 was an economic disaster for property owners without any diversification in their sources of income. Musorgsky had grown up particularly close to the serfs since his childhood in his family's Pskov estate near the village of Karevo. He must have been very approving of that change, in spite of the fact that his income was significantly affected since 1861, and gradually became insufficient to cover rent for a private apartment. In 1872, he formed a close relationship with the poet Arseny Golenishev-Kutuzov, and they shared an apartment in Petersburg from 1874 until the poet's marriage in 1875. The roommates worked together, and their result was parts of the cycle Sunless, 1874, and the Songs and Dances of Death, 1875 to 77. The Songs and Dances of Death is a collection inspired by the Danse Macabre, a medieval theme born out of the horrific plague epidemics of medieval Europe, and it was initially envisioned as a musical equivalent to the theme of the Totentanz, like the woodcuts of Hans Holbein the Younger, who made 39 of them. Its topic is a fatal dance between death and characters from all social classes, ages, and backgrounds, from peasants to autocrats, which can be perceived as terrifying, cathartic, or redeeming, depending on someone's religious background. Premature death was a frequent tragedy in the early 19th century Europe, and it was a common part of public life. The chronic overwork, combined with poor sanitation, poor eating, and the overcrowding in the expanding industrialized cities, acted as a catalyst for the spreading of bacilli. A new kind of epidemics were a side effect of early capitalism. For every 2 births, only 1 led to an adult. Even kids made games that familiarized them with the probability of their early death. Cholera, tuberculosis, and syphilis were among the primary killers in both Europe and Russia. Chopin, Schubert, and Paganini had either one or both tuberculosis and syphilis. Schumann's rapid mental decline might have been related to neurosyphilis. In Russian, the word for death is smert, which by the ending indicates a feminine. In Europe, most of the languages descended from Latin have a feminine death, la morte, la muerte, and in German it is der Tod, which is a masculine. In the masculine version of death, the most prevalent representation is that of a skeleton, sometimes clothed in black or holding a scythe. An early name of the songs and dances of death is danse macabre and she, which is how it was referred to in Musorgsky's correspondence. It was not published during the composer's lifetime. A list of numerous subjects was envisioned in the beginning, but only 4 remain, named Lullaby, Serenade, Trepak, and Field Commander. The first 3 pieces were composed during the cohabitation with Count Golenishtchev-Kutuzov in 1875, and the 4th was finished 2 years later at the town of Tsarskoye Selo, just outside of Petersburg. In each of the poems, the death of a character is described. In the lullaby, she comes to take a mother's baby, which is dying. In the serenade, she appears as a knight serenading a girl. In the Trepak, death comes to bury a drunk peasant who is lost in a snow-covered forest. In the last song, death appears as triumphant in the battlefield, commanding the fallen soldiers. The poem is structured as a dialogue between death and the mother, with an introduction setting the scene. The mother watches over her sick baby. The whole night she has been helplessly rocking the cradle, and the sun is now rising. Suddenly, someone knocks on the door and enters the room. It's Death. The mother is worried, but Death reassures her to not be frightened. All she wants to do is take her turn in tending to the baby. The mother reacts, telling Death to be quiet, lest the disturbance will agitate the child. The argument continues. Death wants to sing a lullaby to lull the baby to sleep. Each time she sings, she concludes with the lullaby, Bayushki, bayu, bayu. The mother resists, but eventually yields. Finally, the baby falls asleep in death's hands. Rarely did Musorgsky compose based on poems about romantic love. The theme of the Serenade is the popular in Europe theme of dying in the context of love. The poem consists of a third-person descriptive setting of the scene and a first-person serenade sung by death, with the music being analogous to the poem's structure. A sick young maiden sits alone in her bedroom. Under her window, a figure is waiting. It is death, personified as a knight singing a serenade. She sings to her that she will be her knight and will set her free of her suffering. She flatters her with gentle compliments and seduces her, convincing her to fall into her hands and take her away.
Молчали полночи, смерть серенаду поет. В мраке неволи суровой и тесной молодость твоя, рыцарь неведомый, силой чудесной освобожу я тебя. Слух твой пленился моей серенадой, рыцаря шепот твой спал, рыцарь пришел за последней наградой, освобожу я тебя. Нежен твой стан, упоителен трепет, о, душу я тебя в крепких объятиях. Любовный мой лепет, слушай, молчи. Ты моя.
The Trepak is a Russian folk dance of Cossack origin in 2/4 time. It is performed by men who kick the legs from a squatting position. As a special effect, its tempo might accelerate and decelerate. In the poem, a stormy night is depicted in which darkness prevails. but it's not devoid of presence. A peasant is drunk and exhausted amidst the woods. Death has approached him to dance a trepak with him. The dance then starts. It shows influence of Liszt's Totentanz, Dance of Death, published 2 decades earlier, which features the Gregorian chant Dies Irae, Day of Wrath, in theme and variations form. The theme and the first variation have similar motives with the Trepak, and the opening melody is similar to the Dies Irae. He composes the dance's start while alluding to Liszt's Totentanz, the Dies Irae, and the Russian spoken language at the same time, while maintaining musical integrity. After it becomes certain that the peasant will die, the setting changes from a trepak to a lullaby. When he finally falls, she whispers a summer image into his ear. A small motive from the Trepak is repeated, indicating the peasant's inability to dance. In 1877, a war between Russia and the Ottoman Empire took place, which had about 30,000 fallen from each side in the battles. It's possible that the choice of the field commander was influenced by that event. The poem by Kutuzov is titled The Triumph of Death, Торжество смерти, and was influenced by Liszt's Totentanz and the synonymous fresco by Buonamico Buffalmacco from the 1330s. The triumph of death is a recurring theme in European art centered on the concept of death's omnipresence. In the poem, a battle with troops, horses, and cannons is described in 3 scenes. In the first scene, the action in the battlefield is described. In the second, the night falls, and in the third, death's arrival. The death's depiction in this occurrence has a notable resemblance to 3 of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse: death, conquest, and war. She appears on a skeleton horse, light under the moonlight, and runs around the fallen of the battlefield until she reaches the top of the hill. She then stops, smiles, and shouts that she has won over everyone. All the fallen have submitted before her. The theme shouted is the Polish song With Smoke of Fires, Z dymem pożarów, which served like a national anthem in Poland, and it appears in 3 variations.
Поднявшись, оглянулась, остановилась, улыбнулась. И над равниной боевой пронесся голос роковой. Кончена битва, я всех победила, все предо мной высмирились бойцы. Жизнь вас поссорила, помирила. Дружно вставайте, на смотр мертвецы.
She commands the fallen to stand up and march, and tells them that she will bury their bones, and after they are long gone and forgotten, she will be the only one visiting their graves from time to time, making sure they never arise from the ground.
Пляской тяжелую, в землю сырую, я притопчу, чтобы сень гробовой